What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a DLC review for Siren's Rest, a DLC for Still Wakes the Deep, a tremendous narrative game that released this time last year, actually, and just recently had this DLC announced and then, of course, subsequently released, and having enjoyed the base game quite a bit, obviously this is something I wanted to take a look at. But straight away, this DLC does contain some pretty big spoilers for the base game, as it is essentially an exploration of the story and lore about what happened after the main game took place. As such, in order to put this into context, I do have to talk a little bit about that. So if you haven't played the base game and you want to, I'd maybe recommend coming back to this later, as the base game itself is not a particularly long game. I'd be surprised if it took you more than 10 hours. But with that out of the way, Siren's Rest puts us in the role of the leader of a saturation dive crew. I don't really have the time to explain what saturation diving is in full here, but if you're curious, look it up. It's actually super interesting. However, our goal or our mission as these divers is to recover essentially everything we can, both information and actual physical evidence of the passing of the Barra-D crew, which is the oil rig that the main game took place on. While saying as little as possible, the end result is that oil rig gets destroyed and sinks to the bottom of the sea, of course. And as a result of that, several years later, this crew is here trying to piece together what evidence they can, bring mementos back to the victims' families, that kind of thing. But as both the name of the game might imply, and just the simple setting here, they aren't exactly resting peacefully. Now let's talk a few general details. For starters, this DLC is pretty short. I would be shocked if it took you more than 3 hours, honestly. It took me about 3 hours to run through it for the first time, and that was with me doing a ton of extra exploration I did not need to do. So narratively speaking, it is very short. Another way that it differs from the main game, though, is that the horror elements are mostly that you are at the bottom of the sea in this diving situation. In fact, most of the dangers here are environmental. If you try to ascend too far, you're going to die, things like that. Many of the dangers we faced in the main game really only come up in one small section at the very end of this experience, which, for me at least, admittedly is honestly a bit of a missed opportunity. You've already set this DLC at the bottom of the sea, leaning into thalassophobia, of course, but why then would you not, lean fully into that and obviously do all sorts of the horror elements here? But instead, what we spend much of our time doing is exploring the wrecks of the oil rig parts and modules. Now, it's not to say that's a bad experience, because as I mentioned, what this does is it expands the story and lore of the aftermath of that destructive event. You can get a little more context on the characters you met, what happened afterwards, that kind of thing. But the thing is, if you weren't really invested in the story of the base game, then I don't necessarily know that this would really do anything for you. And given the type of horror that this game ultimately is, if you're expecting hard answers there, you're not going to get any. But much like the base game, it does, however, ooze atmosphere and environmental storytelling, and we're going to experience that a little bit through some gameplay mechanics. So much of what we're doing, truth be told, is just swimming around. But we are here to collect evidence, and we're going to do that primarily simply by finding mementos of the crew, and finding those will typically give you a little bit of background on people you would have met during the base game. And you can also find some corpses down here, and then you can take pictures of them, I guess to confirm their deaths. They say they're going to show these to the family members, and I was like, I gotta be real with you, I would never want to see that, but do you, I guess. On top of that stuff, in terms of other gameplay elements besides just exploring the various slightly more open areas of the DLC where you can interact with locations and types of things you'll have experienced in the base game as well, we're going to use things like a torch to break up rusted parts of various obstacles to get through them, pry things open with a crowbar, and then a little later in the back half of the DLC it also starts to play around with light mechanics, with your headlamp going out and you having to use flares to actually navigate, which is probably a good time to mention that while you are on the bottom of the sea for all of it, there are a couple parts where you find various air pockets that you'll be able to actually walk around and explore in. But in order to explore those and a couple of parts under the actual water, you do occasionally have to detach from your umbilical cord, which is effectively your oxygen supply, that kind of thing. So in some cases you have to navigate really quickly without those things before you try to get back to the relative safety of that tethered connection. Now, just as a bit of a nitpick here, I did notice a lot of bugs with like the animations around this cord and the fact that obviously it doesn't really make sense with you navigating the ship the way you are for this cord to just be endlessly following you and it never retracts in any way, that kind of thing. So it just kind of looks a little silly for much of the time through it, and given the relatively serious tone and atmosphere of the rest of it, it just kind of bugged me. But unsurprisingly, given the nature of the game and everything, there does come a moment where you are descending not just into the depths, but also into madness, as you probably expect. And this does see a few extra gameplay features, like trying to find, pieces that connect your main character's story and who she is to the events of the crew. Why are you down here checking these things out, as an example? But realistically, without just spoiling the rest of the DLC outright, that's basically all there is to say because, as I mentioned, it's pretty short. You're probably going to run through this in 2 to 3 hours. And while I think if you enjoyed the base game, this is an enjoyable enough experience for what it's trying to be, it does, at the same time, feel like there were a few missed opportunities here. And while it's interesting, I also just don't think it's as good as the base game, as an example. And given that you don't get a lot of answers to questions you'll probably have by the end of this, I wouldn't consider it, essential to the experience. So as a result of that, with the $13 base price and $11 launch discount price, I would say that Siren's Rest is pretty good if you enjoy what the base game had to offer. Like if you were really invested in that story and want to see a little bit more of it, Siren's Rest does some cool things, but I also don't think it's as good as it could have been, and I also don't think it's essential to know any of this. So as a result of that, if you really loved Still Wakes the Deep and you want to have a little bit more of experience with that, setting and everything, a little over $10 for this isn't bad. But also, I don't really think you're missing much by skipping it. And so, if you find yourself with about $10 to spare and a craving for a short and sweet horror experience, then you might consider Siren's Rest. But I think that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.